Thank you for being here. Please have a glass of warm water, sit down, and listen to me tell the rest of my story. The ground was soft beneath my shoes, the kind of damp, red Carolina clay that seems to swallow sound completely. I stood there at Maplewood Cemetery, the cold rain soaking right through the shoulders of my black suit, but I barely felt it. My entire world had narrowed down to the polished mahogany box resting on the metal lowering device. Ava's casket. It looked impossibly small suspended over that dark, perfectly rectangular hole. My 9-year-old little girl. She had fought a rare and incredibly aggressive blood disorder for 11 agonizing months. And now the fight was over. The monitors, the needles, the frantic midnight drives to the emergency room. It had all ended in this heavy, suffocating silence. I gripped the hem of my dark coat, pressing my thumb into the wet fabric, trying desperately to stop my hands from shaking. It didn't work. The tremor started in my fingers and radiated all the way up my arms. I looked around, desperate for an anchor. Beside me there was only one person. Not my mother, Lorraine. Not my father, Charles. Not my younger brother, Carter. Just Arthur, my 72-year-old neighbor. He stood silently under a large, black golf umbrella, his weathered, calloused hand resting lightly on my shoulder. Arthur was the one who had brought me foil-wrapped casseroles during those endless nights. He was the one who sat by Ava's bed reading her stories so I could take a 10-minute shower without breaking down. Today, of all days, this elderly neighbor was the only one who showed up for my daughter's funeral. The minister cleared his throat and murmured familiar verses about angels and comfort, his voice sounding hollow against the biting wind. Right at that precise moment, my phone buzzed in my pocket, a sharp, loud vibration that felt like an electric shock against my leg. I shouldn't have checked it. Any sane person would have left it in their pocket. But the isolation of that graveyard was crushing me, and some desperate, broken, pathetic part of my brain hoped it was my family. I hoped they had been delayed by a massive traffic jam. I hoped they were rushing down the gravel path right now, out of breath, apologizing for being late to stand by my side. I pulled the phone out. The screen lit up with an Instagram notification. It was Carter. I swiped the alert with my thumb, and the image loaded instantly. It wasn't a message of condolence. It was a picture of my brother, wearing a crisp, custom-tailored navy suit, holding a crystal champagne flute high in the air. Beside him was his fiancée, flashing a massive diamond ring directly at the camera lens. Flanking them were my parents. My mother was wearing a bright, floral silk dress, her head thrown back in a wide, carefree laugh. They looked like a magazine advertisement for the perfect, affluent American family. The location tag at the top of the photo read, Grand Horizon Hotel, Raleigh. They were exactly 5 miles away. The caption beneath the photo read, The start of forever, celebrating our engagement with the best family a guy could ask for. #blessed #next chapter. I stared at the glowing screen until the raindrops falling on the glass blurred the faces of the people who shared my blood. They hadn't been delayed. They hadn't been overwhelmed by the paralyzing grief of losing a grandchild. They had simply chosen a lavish party over the funeral of my child. My jaw clamped so hard I thought my teeth might crack. Then, a text message dropped down from the top of the screen. It was from my mother. Stop being dramatic. This is urgent. My thumb hovered over the shattered glass of my screen guard. Dramatic? I was burying my only child. For a split second, I thought maybe she realized what day it was and was trying to cover up her massive guilt. But the next text followed immediately, pinging loudly in the quiet cemetery. We need to discuss Ava's trust fund. $950,000 cannot sit idle. We will see you tomorrow morning. The cold air rushed out of my lungs completely. I closed my eyes, the phone slipping from my numb fingers back into my coat pocket. They didn't care that my entire universe had just ended. They only cared about the money. And I knew right then, standing in the mud beside my daughter's grave with Arthur holding the umbrella over me, that the nightmare wasn't over. It was just changing its shape. As Arthur drove me home from the cemetery in his beat-up Ford truck, the rhythmic, squeaking thump of his windshield wipers pulled my mind backward. 11 months ago. That was when the very first crack appeared in the foundation of my perfectly normal life. Ava had been getting mysterious bruises on her legs. Just little purple and yellow spots that I initially brushed off as standard playground injuries. Then came the low-grade fever that absolutely wouldn't break, her suddenly pale skin, and an exhaustion so deep she slept through entire weekends. I distinctly remembered sitting in Dr. Evans' office. The walls were painted a cheerful, bright yellow that felt entirely mocking given the circumstances. He didn't look me in the eye when he said the words, "acute lymphoblastic leukemia." He handed me a thick stack of glossy pamphlets that felt as heavy as lead in my hands. I walked out of that clinic holding Ava's tiny, warm hand, completely terrified, feeling like the floor had vanished beneath my feet. The very first thing I did when I strapped her securely into her car seat was pull out my phone and call my father. I was 31 years old, but in that moment, I just needed my dad. I needed him to tell me exactly what to do, to tell me we would fight this monster together. Charles answered on the third ring. Immediately, I heard background noise, the clinking of fine glassware and loud, boisterous chatter. "Julian, make it quick. We're at a dinner for Carter's new promotion," he said, his voice carrying that familiar, clipped tone of impatience he always used with me. "Dad, it's Ava," I choked out, the tears I had been holding back finally spilling over my steering wheel. "She has leukemia. It's bad, Dad. We have to start aggressive chemotherapy treatment immediately. I don't know what to do. I'm scared." There was a pause on the line. A long, agonizing, hollow pause. Then my father sighed. It wasn't a sigh of sorrow or shock, but the heavy, irritated breath of a busy man being interrupted. "Julian, listen to me very carefully. Carter just got made regional director. It's a huge night for him. We cannot deal with this kind of negativity right now. Kids get sick. You need to pray on it and let the doctors do their job. Don't ruin your brother's moment." He hung up, just like that, a sharp click and then dead air. I sat in the driver's seat of my sedan, the phone pressed hard against my ear, listening to the silence. That was the exact moment I realized I was completely, utterly alone in this fight. Things spiraled fast. I lost my salary a month later. My boss was understanding at the very beginning, but when the hospital stays stretched from a few days into weeks, and I missed my third consecutive major project deadline, they had to let me go. I didn't even blame them. I couldn't focus on spreadsheets when my focus was entirely on the digital monitors keeping my daughter alive. The medical bills started piling up on my small kitchen counter like a paper mountain of doom. The eviction notices quickly followed. I sold my car, my watch, my television. Everything that wasn't nailed down. And through it all, Arthur was the one who showed up. He knocked on my door on a rainy Tuesday evening, holding a heavy red toolbox and a steaming pot of chicken stew. "I saw the hospital visitor tags accumulating on your dashboard," he said gruffly, not making a big, emotional deal out of it. "You sit down and eat. I'll fix that leaky sink you've been ignoring for a month." He stepped up and became the grandfather Ava desperately deserved. He played endless card games with her when she was too weak to sit up in her hospital bed. He held her hair back when the harsh chemicals made her violently ill. My real family? They sent a generic, store-bought get-well-soon card with a printed signature. No phone calls, no visits, just silence. The only reason I didn't end up living in a cardboard box outside the Duke Medical Center during those brutal months was Elena. Elena was my ex-wife, Ava's mother. Our divorce had been a quiet, sad, but ultimately amicable affair a few years prior. We had just grown apart, two people moving in entirely different directions in life. But Elena was brilliant, fiercely protective, and she came from a wealthy family that thoroughly understood the brutal, financial reality of the world. She had received a substantial inheritance from her grandfather right before our marriage officially ended. I vividly remember the day we sat in her lawyer's office in downtown Charlotte to finalize the final custody and financial paperwork. She slid a thick, heavy manila folder across the polished oak conference table toward me. "What's this?" I asked, looking down at the official legal seals and notarized stamps. "It's a trust fund for Ava," Elena said, her dark eyes entirely serious and unblinking. $950,000. It's locked up tight, Julian. The money is primarily for her college fund, her future, her wedding, her life. But, she hesitated, leaning forward, lowering her voice. "I know your family, Julian. I know how Charles and Lorraine operate. If anything ever happens to me, or God forbid, if anything happens to Ava, I made sure the trust names you as the sole residual beneficiary. Nobody else can touch a single dime. Not your parents. Not Carter. Just you." I had thought she was being overly dramatic and paranoid. "Elena, they're my family. Sure, they favor Carter, but they wouldn't steal from a child." She gave me a very sad, deeply knowing smile that I will never forget. "Money makes monsters out of people you thought you knew. Promise me you'll protect it, Julian. Don't let them near it." I promised her. 2 years later, Elena died instantly in a massive multi-car pileup on Interstate 40. It devastated Ava, and it broke a significant piece of me, too. But Elena's incredible financial foresight became a silent, invisible guardian in our home. I never touched the money. Even when I was drowning in medical debt, even when I was eating instant noodles for dinner, the trust was legally structured so it couldn't be used for daily living expenses or even most standard medical bills without a lengthy court approval process, which took months I simply didn't have. So I scraped by. I took out predatory personal loans. I completely ruined my credit score. But the $950,000 sat safely in a high-yield account, waiting for a bright future Ava would never get to see. Now, with Ava gone, that money legally transferred directly to me. I hadn't even thought about it once during the funeral preparations. My brain was too full of agonizing grief, too full of the haunting image of her empty bed in the pediatric ward. But my family had clearly thought about it. They had apparently been thinking about it a lot, calculating the exact moment they could get their hands on it. Those endless nights in the pediatric oncology ward were a specific, agonizing kind of hell that changes a person forever. The air in that wing always smelled intensely of bleach, sterile cotton, and underlying fear. The constant, rhythmic beeping of the 4 pumps delivering toxic chemicals into tiny veins became a permanent soundtrack to my mounting anxiety. Ava would lie there, her skin looking almost translucent under the harsh fluorescent lights, her little bald head wrapped tightly in a soft purple beanie that Arthur had knitted for her. "Dad?" she whispered one night, her voice barely louder than the hum of the hospital room's air conditioner. "I'm right here, sweetie," I said, leaning my elbows over the cold metal bed rail, gently stroking her pale cheek. "Is Grandma coming to visit today? She told me on my birthday she would bring me a giant teddy bear." I felt a sharp, physical pain in the center of my chest. Lorraine had casually promised to visit 3 weeks ago. Every single day, Ava asked about her. Every single day, I had to invent a brand new, plausible lie to protect my daughter's feelings. "Grandma is feeling a little under the weather, honey. She has a bad cold and doesn't want to give you her germs while your immune system is weak. But she loves you so much." The brutal truth was documented right there on my phone. While Ava was throwing up green bile into a plastic basin and crying out from the severe bone pain caused by the marrow treatments, I had mindlessly scrolled through Facebook in the bleak hospital waiting room. I saw Carter's public post. He was leaning casually against a brand-new, silver Porsche 911 parked in front of a luxury dealership in downtown Raleigh. The caption was arrogant, as always, "Hard work pays off. Upgrading my life because I earned it." Beneath it, the very first comment was from my mother. "So proud of my golden boy. You deserve the absolute world. Can't wait for our luxury spa weekend in Aspen tomorrow morning." She wasn't sick. She wasn't busy. She was actively packing designer luggage for a high-end ski resort vacation while her 9-year-old granddaughter was fighting for her very survival. I had stared at that photo until my eyes literally burned. I wanted to scream until my throat bled. I wanted to drive straight to that dealership and smash the windshield of that pristine Porsche with a baseball bat. But I couldn't leave the hospital. I was anchored to the pediatric ward, watching my daughter slowly fade away into a shadow, while my family lived a loud, flashy, consequence-free life of luxury. They purposely made themselves invisible to us. They stopped answering my frantic phone calls. Charles sent a brief text once saying he was too stressed at the firm to deal with the depressing atmosphere of hospitals. Carter actually blocked my phone number entirely because I had desperately asked him for a small, temporary loan to cover my rent when the final eviction notice was taped to my door. They completely and utterly erased us from their reality, because a dying, bald child simply didn't fit into their picture-perfect country club aesthetic. The morning after the funeral, the sky hung incredibly low and slate gray over the city of Raleigh. I hadn't slept a single minute. I had spent the entire night sitting rigidly on the floor of Ava's bedroom, clutching her favorite worn-out stuffed rabbit to my chest, staring blankly at the plastic glow-in-the-dark stars stuck to her ceiling. At exactly 8 a.m., I forced myself up. I washed my face with freezing water, put on a clean, wrinkled button-down shirt, and drove my battered sedan toward Oakwood Heights. My parents' house was a massive, imposing colonial-style estate situated at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. The sprawling lawn was manicured to an inch of its life. The white wooden shutters were freshly painted and gleaming. It looked completely untouched by the horrific tragedy that had utterly destroyed my world. I parked my old car on the street, directly behind Carter's gleaming silver Porsche in the expansive driveway. My stomach twisted into a tight, hard, painful knot as I walked slowly up the swept brick path. Before I even had the chance to raise my hand and knock, the heavy oak front door swung open. Charles stood there, wearing a perfectly pressed Ralph Lauren polo shirt and beige khakis, his face carefully arranged into a practiced mask of solemn concern. It looked exactly like a politician facing a camera. "Julian, come in. We've been waiting for you," he said. His baritone voice was warm and inviting, but the warmth completely failed to reach his cold eyes. I stepped cautiously into the grand foyer. The rich smell of expensive cinnamon coffee and fresh bakery pastries filled the air. I walked past him into the living room and stopped dead in my tracks. They had set the room up like a corporate boardroom. Lorraine was standing rigidly by the stone fireplace, her hands clasped delicately in front of her waist. Carter was lounging casually on the expensive leather sofa, tapping his Italian leather shoe impatiently against the rug. On the thick glass coffee table in the absolute center of the room sat a thick manila folder. Crisp, white legal papers were neatly arranged beside it, a heavy silver Mont Blanc pen resting perfectly parallel to the edges of the documents. "Have a seat, sweetheart," Lorraine said, taking one small step toward me but noticeably stopping short of actually offering a comforting hug. "We know this is a terribly difficult, emotional time for you. We purposely wanted to give you space yesterday, to process everything." Space. The word tasted like foul ash in my mouth. You were drinking expensive champagne at a luxury hotel exactly 5 miles from the cemetery. You skipped your own granddaughter's funeral for an engagement party. Carter rolled his eyes exaggeratedly and sat forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Look, bro, let's not do the whole dramatic guilt trip thing, okay? The party was planned months ago. The vendor deposits were completely non-refundable. We grieved in our own private way. We're here now to help you sort out this financial mess." He reached out and tapped the thick folder on the table with his index finger. The knot in my stomach instantly turned to cold, hard ice. I walked slowly to the opposite sofa and sat down, staring intently at the documents. I knew exactly what was in there. I just didn't know how far they were legally willing to go to take it from me. Carter didn't waste any time with pleasantries. He slid the top legal document across the smooth glass table directly toward me. The bold, black print at the very top of the page read, "Voluntary relinquishment of fiduciary rights and transfer of trust assets." "This is incredibly simple, Julian," Carter said, his tone slick, confident, and authoritative, exactly like he was closing a massive commercial real estate deal. "Ava's trust is highly significant. We're talking almost $1 million. You are clearly in no condition to manage that kind of money responsibly. You've been unemployed for nearly a year, your credit score is wrecked, and frankly, you're emotionally compromised and unstable right now. If you just sign your name on that line, I'll legally step in as the primary trustee. I have the financial background. I'll make sure the money is invested properly for the family. For the family, I repeated, the words sounding entirely hollow and foreign in the quiet room. Lorraine chimed in instantly, her voice dripping with syrupy, fake concern. We're only thinking of your long-term well-being, Julian. Severe grief heavily clouds judgment. You absolutely shouldn't bear this heavy financial burden all alone. Let your capable brother handle the stress for you. I didn't look at them. I kept my eyes pinned to the table. Slowly, I reached out and picked up the document. The legal jargon was dense and confusing, but my eyes automatically scanned the margins of the pages, looking for the specific terms of the transfer. I was looking for the signature line, but instead, my gaze caught a tiny, faded string of numbers printed in the top right corner. A small date stamp from the notary's office when the draft was initially prepared and filed. October 14th. My breath hitched violently in my throat. I stared intensely at the tiny numbers, blinking rapidly to make absolutely sure my exhausted eyes weren't playing cruel tricks on me. October 14th. That was exactly 6 months ago. October 14th was the exact day Ava was rushed into the intensive care unit with a massive septic infection. It was the terrifying day the leading doctors pulled me into a sterile, cold hallway and told me she had less than a 10% chance of making it through the night. I had called my parents from the hospital corridor, sobbing uncontrollably, practically begging them on my hands and knees to come say goodbye to her. They had coldly told me they were praying hard, but couldn't make the short drive because of a severe storm warning that actually turned out to be a light, passing drizzle. While I was holding my dying daughter's fragile hand, terrified of every single shallow breath she took, my parents and my brother were sitting comfortably in a high-end lawyer's office, drafting legal documents to steal her money. They had been actively waiting for her to die. They had meticulously planned this financial takeover for half a year. The shock hit me so hard it felt entirely physical, like a punch to the sternum. A cold, creeping numbness spread rapidly from my chest down to my fingertips. Then, within seconds, the numbness vanished, instantly replaced by a sudden, blinding, hot rage. A thick vein throbbed violently against my temple. I slowly looked up from the paper and stared at the three of them. They weren't my family. They were ruthless scavengers circling a fresh corpse. October 14th, I said. My voice was a low, dangerous, gravelly whisper that didn't sound like me at all. It sounded like a stranger. Carter frowned deeply, shifting uncomfortably on the expensive leather sofa. What did you say? I held the crisp paper up in the air, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger at the tiny date stamp in the corner. You drafted this legal paperwork 6 months ago, the exact day she went into septic shock. The day you told me you couldn't drive down to the hospital because of the rain. You were sitting with a lawyer. The living room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick carpet. Lorraine's practiced, sympathetic smile instantly slipped off her face, leaving her looking old, harsh, and utterly caught. Charles cleared his throat loudly, his face flushing a deep, angry red. Now, Julian, you need to calm down and understand the practicalities of the situation. Charles started, using his booming, authoritative CEO voice to try and dominate the room. Shut up, I snapped, cutting him off completely. Charles blinked rapidly, genuinely shocked. I had never, ever spoken to him like that in my entire 32 years of life. I stood up abruptly, my legs shaking but holding firm. My fists were clenched so tightly my knuckles were bone white. You didn't come to the hospital. You didn't come to the damn funeral. You let me drown in crippling debt while you bought a luxury Porsche. And the whole time, the entire damn time, you were just sitting around waiting for her little heart to stop beating so you could fund a lavish wedding. I grabbed the stack of legal papers off the glass table and ripped them straight down the middle with all my strength. The harsh sound of tearing heavy paper was deafening in the quiet room. I let the torn pieces flutter dramatically to the floor, landing near Carter's expensive shoes. No, I won't sign a damn thing. Not today, not ever. Carter stood up abruptly, kicking the papers aside. His slick, confident demeanor vanished completely, replaced by genuine, unfiltered malice. He pointed a sharp finger inches from my face. Don't be impulsive, you idiot. You have no salary. You have zero savings. You are a broken, pathetic mess. We are trying to do this the nice, easy way. The nice way. I laughed. A harsh, jagged, humorless sound that scraped my throat. Charles stepped heavily forward, towering over me. His eyes were cold, calculating, and entirely devoid of paternal love. If you don't sign this voluntarily, Julian, we will take it to court. I promise you that. We will file for emergency legal custody and guardianship over you. We will easily prove to a judge that you are mentally unstable, suicidal from grief, and entirely unfit to manage your own life, let alone $1 million trust fund. You will lose everything. The money, your dignity, your freedom. Everything. I looked dead into my father's eyes. I saw the absolute, terrifying certainty there. He fully intended to destroy me publicly if he couldn't control me privately. Try it, I said, my voice steady. I turned my back on them and walked purposefully toward the front door. You're making a massive mistake, Charles shouted loudly after me, his voice echoing in the grand foyer. You walk out that door, you have no family left. I pulled the heavy oak door open and stepped onto the porch. I haven't had a family in a long time, I said without looking back, and stepped out into the crisp, cold Carolina air. The drive back to my empty, cramped apartment was a complete blur of motion and suppressed panic. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my wrists physically ached by the time I parked. When I finally unlocked the door and walked inside, the absolute silence of the house hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. There were still unopened boxes of medical supplies stacked high in the corner of the living room. A pair of Ava's small, pink sneakers still sat exactly where she had left them by the door. I slid down the wall in the narrow hallway, pulling my knees tight to my chest, and finally, the protective anger evaporated, giving way to absolute, crushing exhaustion. A sharp, authoritative knock at the door startled me out of my daze. I dragged myself up from the floor and opened it. Arthur was standing there on the wooden porch. He didn't have a casserole this time. He was holding two thick, worn spiral-bound notebooks in one hand and a large metal thermos of black coffee in the other. I saw your car pull in, Arthur said gruffly, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. You look like you just went 10 rounds with a runaway freight train. Move over. He pushed past me into the small kitchen, setting the heavy thermos and notebooks down on the laminate counter. He poured a steaming cup of coffee into a mug and slid it toward me. I took it, my hands shaking so badly the dark liquid splashed over the rim onto my fingers. They ambushed me, I whispered, the words scraping painfully against my dry throat. They wanted me to sign away Elena's trust fund. They've been planning it for months. My dad straight up threatened to declare me mentally incompetent so he could take control of the money. Arthur didn't look surprised in the slightest. His jaw tightened, the deep wrinkles around his eyes grooving further. He reached over and tapped the two notebooks he had brought with a calloused finger. I'm an old man, Julian. I don't sleep much, Arthur said, his voice steady, serious, and grounding. And I noticed a very long time ago that your fancy family never came around. So, I started keeping track. I looked at the notebooks, confused. Keeping track of what? Everything, he said firmly. Every single day I drove you to the hospital. Every time you called them for help from the driveway and threw your phone in the grass when they hung up on you. The dates, the exact times, the weather. I wrote down the days Carter was posting pictures of his fancy steak dinners while you were buying discounted soup cans at the dollar store. It's all in here. A meticulous timeline of their neglect. Hot tears pricked my eyes. This old man, who owed me absolutely nothing in this world, had been silently building a fortress to protect me while I was too blind and overwhelmed to see the danger coming. You can't face them alone, Arthur continued, leaning his weight against the counter. Charles has deep pockets and money buys very loud, aggressive lawyers. You need someone smarter, someone meaner. I know a guy, Nathan Hayes. He's a pit bull in a tailored suit. He handles complex estate litigation, and he absolutely hates bullies. Arthur pulled a crumpled, slightly stained business card from his flannel shirt pocket and pressed it firmly into my hand. Call him, right now. You do not let them take what belongs to the memory of that little girl. Nathan Hayes' office was located in a sleek, modern glass building in downtown Raleigh. It didn't smell like old books or dusty leather. It smelled intensely of expensive cologne and freshly bleached floors. Nathan himself was incredibly sharp, dressed in a flawless charcoal suit, his eyes moving quickly and intelligently behind thin wire-rimmed glasses. He sat behind his massive desk and listened to my entire story without interrupting once, his silver pen flying furiously across a yellow legal pad. When I finally finished and handed him Arthur's meticulous notebooks and the ripped pieces of the trust document I had shoved into my pocket, his eyes lit up with a dangerous, calculating kind of energy. They made a critical, arrogant error, Nathan said, his voice calm, methodical, and chillingly precise. They got extremely greedy, and they put their greed on paper 6 months early. But Charles is completely right about one thing. They will inevitably file for emergency guardianship. They will confidently argue that the trauma of losing Ava has triggered a psychotic break. It's a standard, dirty, aggressive playbook in family wealth disputes. How do we stop them from doing it? I asked, my pulse pounding loudly in my ears. We don't stop them from attacking. We actively let them attack, and we build a solid brick wall for them to crash into at full speed, Nathan said, leaning over the desk toward me. First, you need to go to a board-certified psychiatrist immediately. Today. I'll make the appointment myself. We need a spotless, ironclad evaluation proving your mental competence before they even file the initial papers. We cut off their main legal argument before they can even make it in court. He pointed the sharp end of his pen directly at me. Second, we need to secure your physical environment. If Carter is as impulsive and arrogant as you say, he won't wait patiently for the court date. He'll try to intimidate you personally. He'll want a reaction he can record and use against you as evidence of instability. What exactly do? I asked, feeling a strange sense of focus returning. You document everything. Save every text message, print every Instagram post, take screenshots of every Facebook comment. Let them eagerly build their fake public narrative of the grieving, concerned family. And Julian. Nathan paused, looking dead into my eyes, ensuring I grasped the severity of his next instruction. Go to Home Depot right after this. Buy high-definition security cameras with active audio recording. Put one on your front porch, one at the back door. Do not tell anyone, not even Arthur. I left his office feeling a strange, freezing cold clarity. The paralyzing, suffocating grief had been temporarily locked in a mental box, replaced by a hyper-focused survival instinct. I drove straight to the hardware store. That night, under the cover of darkness, I stood on a wobbly ladder and drilled the small, black lenses directly into the eaves of my house. I carefully synced them to the app on my phone, watching the clear, crisp night vision feed of my empty driveway. I sat alone on the couch in the dark, watching the glowing monitor. I wasn't just a grieving father anymore. I was a soldier actively digging a trench. Let them come. The first major strike of their campaign came exactly 3 days later. I woke up at 6 a.m. to my phone aggressively blowing up with notifications. I groggily opened Facebook and saw a public post from Carter that made my blood run instantly cold. It was a highly edited picture of him looking deeply somber, staring out a rain-streaked window. The caption was an absolute masterpiece of emotional manipulation. Please pray for my older brother, Julian. Losing his beautiful daughter has completely broken his mind. He's aggressively refusing professional help, acting incredibly erratically, and viciously cutting off the family that deeply loves him. Mental health is a silent killer, folks. We are doing everything in our power to step in legally and save him from himself before it's too late. Hold your loved ones tight. The comments below it were a sickening flood of sympathy. People I went to high school with, former co-workers, distant neighbors, all sending digital prayers and praising Carter for being such a supportive, heroic brother. None of them knew the actual truth. None of them knew about the shiny Porsche, or the lavish hotel engagement party, or the $1 million trust fund. Later that same afternoon, a link was texted to me by a highly confused former colleague. It was a link to a local online news portal. The dramatic headline read, "Local prominent family seeks urgent legal intervention for grieving, unstable father." They had actually gone to the local press. Charles had provided an official quote. "It breaks our hearts to take formal legal action, but my son is a clear danger to himself. We must step in to protect him and secure his financial future." I was physically sick to my stomach. They were rapidly laying the groundwork in the court of public opinion, painting me as a raving lunatic so that when the actual court case hit, the assigned judge would already be subconsciously biased. Then, right on cue, the doorbell rang. It was a professional process server. He shoved a thick manila envelope against my chest and walked away without a word. I tore it open aggressively right there on the porch. It was an official summons to appear in Wake County Family Court for an emergency guardianship hearing. But the summons wasn't what made my knees completely buckle. Attached to the legal petition was a sworn, notarized affidavit. A witness statement directly supporting my family's outrageous claim that I was legally insane. I looked at the signature scrawled at the bottom of the final page, expecting to see a fake, paid doctor or a sleazy business associate. Instead, the name punched the air straight out of my lungs. Luke Patterson. Luke, the guy I had known since freshman year of college. The guy who stood beside me as the best man at my wedding. He had signed a binding legal document stating that I had called him in the middle of the night, screaming about wild conspiracies, and that I had explicitly threatened to end my own life. It was a complete 100% fabricated lie. I dropped the heavy papers onto the wooden floorboards. Why on earth would Luke do this to me? I immediately texted Nathan the document. 10 tense minutes later, Nathan called me back, his voice grim and low. "I pulled strings and looked into Luke's current financial records," Nathan said. "He was facing imminent bank foreclosure on his house last month. 2 days ago, a lump sum of exactly $40,000 was quietly wired into his account to clear the debt. The wire came from a hidden shell LLC registered directly to Charles's accounting firm. They had bought him. My own parents had literally purchased my best friend to stab me in the back. The isolation was now absolute. There was no one left to trust. The sting of Luke's betrayal was a bitter, jagged pill to swallow, but it successfully snapped the very last thread of hesitation I had. I stopped crying. I stopped mourning the illusion of the family I thought I had. I became a cold, calculating machine. The very next morning, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Duke Children's Hospital. It was Landon, a young guy who worked deep in the medical records department. He sounded incredibly nervous, his voice shaking slightly. "Mr. Alden, I'm calling because I'm legally obligated to inform you of a severe security breach regarding Ava's files. Someone aggressively used an outdated emergency contact authorization form to request hard copies of her psychiatric evaluations and your personal psychological history." "Who did it?" I demanded, my grip tightening on the phone until my knuckles popped. It was automatically flagged by our new security system because the request bypassed standard protocol. It was authorized by a third-party accountant. "A man named Christopher." Landon hesitated, taking a breath. "He confidently claimed to be acting legally on your behalf." Christopher. He was my father's right-hand man, his shady personal accountant and designated fixer. They were desperately trying to dig up Ava's medical history to see if there was any microscopic angle they could use to prove I was a negligent parent. "Landon," I said, my voice eerily, frighteningly calm, "I need you to thoroughly document exactly how that breach happened. I need the IP addresses, the signed forms, the timestamps, everything. Can you do that for me?" Yes, I can securely send it directly to your lawyer. Do it immediately. That afternoon, I walked into the upscale psychiatrist's office Nathan had booked. I sat under the bright fluorescent lights for 4 grueling hours, answering every probing, exhausting question about my grief, my sleep habits, and my state of mind. I didn't hide my sadness, but I answered with cold, rational, undeniable logic. By the end of the marathon session, the doctor printed out a certified, stamped report. I was heavily grieving, yes, but I was 100% legally competent, highly lucid, and posed zero threat to myself or others. I tucked the crisp paper into my folder like a loaded weapon. It was the night before the major court hearing. I was sitting alone at my kitchen table, reviewing Nathan's aggressive strategy, when the motion sensor light on my driveway flared to life. I looked up. The live video feed on my phone popped up instantly. Carter's gleaming silver Porsche had rolled silently into my driveway, its headlights cutting through the dark. The driver's side door opened, and Carter stepped out into the damp night air. He didn't knock. He stood arrogantly on the porch, looking directly at my front door, completely unaware of the small black lens hidden in the shadows right above his head. He raised his voice, just loud enough to carry clearly through the solid wood. "Julian, I know you're in there cowering. Tomorrow is going to be an absolute bloodbath in court. Luke is going to testify under oath that you're totally insane. Mom and Dad are going to cry tears for the judge. You have no money for a long legal fight. I need that trust fund for the wedding and the down payment on the new house. You're going to lose everything." He paused, a nasty, cruel smirk playing clearly on his lips, visible in the night vision. "You've always been the weak, pathetic link in this family, Julian. Just a massive burden. Sign the papers tomorrow morning before we walk into that courtroom, or I swear to God, we will utterly destroy whatever is left of your miserable life." He spat deliberately on my welcome mat, turned around, and got back into his luxury car. As the red taillights faded down the dark street, I didn't feel a single ounce of fear. I reached over, tapped my phone screen, and securely saved the video file to the cloud. The audio was crystal clear. Tomorrow, they were confidently walking straight into a trap of their own making. The air inside the Wake County Family Court was thick and stifling. The courtroom smelled strongly of lemon wood polish and old paper. I walked through the heavy double oak doors with my lawyer, Nathan, walking briskly beside me. Arthur was right behind us, wearing a stiff, outdated suit that looked like he hadn't worn it in 20 years. He placed a firm hand on my shoulder as we walked down the center aisle. On the left side of the room, sitting at the petitioner's table, was my family. Charles was wearing a conservative gray suit, his hair perfectly combed. Lorraine was dressed in a dark, modest dress, clutching a tissue in her hand. Carter sat between them, looking appropriately somber, his head bowed slightly. They didn't look like a greedy family trying to steal an inheritance. They looked exactly like a tragic, grieving family desperately trying to save a broken man. It was a masterclass in manipulation. Judge Thomas entered the room. He was a stern man with silver hair and sharp eyes that scanned the docket with intense focus. The bailiff called the court to order, and the nightmare officially began. My father's high-priced lawyer stood up and painted a terrifying picture of me. He described a man utterly destroyed by a terrible divorce and the tragic death of his child. He claimed I was neglecting my basic needs, entirely unemployed, and violently hostile to the people who loved me most. Then they called their star witness, Luke Patterson. Luke walked up to the witness stand, his eyes fixed firmly on the floor. He swore on the Bible. The man who had stood next to me at my wedding altar sat down and began to tell the most elaborate, devastating lies I had ever heard. He told the judge that I called him constantly at 3 in the morning, raving about conspiracies. He claimed I had a drinking problem. He testified under oath that I had explicitly threatened to drive my car off a bridge because I had nothing left to live for. "Julian is a danger to himself," Luke said, his voice trembling perfectly. "He is entirely unfit to manage his daily life, let alone manage a complex college fund or trust account. His brother Carter is the only one who can step in and stabilize his life. I sat at the defense table, my hands folded tightly on the polished wood. I felt a burning sensation in my chest. To hear your best friend sell your sanity for a paycheck is a specific kind of agony. I looked over at the petitioner's table. Carter was looking down, but I could see the faint outline of a smirk on his face. He thought he had won. He thought the sheer weight of their collective lies would crush me into submission. He had no idea what was sitting in the manila folder directly in front of Nathan. When it was Nathan's turn to cross-examine, he stood up slowly, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. He didn't yell. He didn't pound his fists. He walked toward the witness stand with the cold precision of a surgeon. "Mr. Patterson," Nathan said smoothly, "you claim you are stepping forward out of deep concern for my client. You claim you have no financial interest in this matter whatsoever." "That is correct," Luke replied, his voice wavering slightly. Nathan picked up a piece of paper from his desk. "Then can you please explain to the court why, exactly 48 hours ago, a lump sum of $40,000 was wired into your personal checking account from a shell corporation tied directly to Charles Alden's accounting firm? The exact amount required to stop the foreclosure on your house." The courtroom erupted into a low murmur. Luke's face drained of all color. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked desperately over at Charles, whose face had suddenly turned a dark, furious shade of crimson. "Objection!" Charles's lawyer shouted, jumping to his feet. "This is wildly speculative." "It is a certified bank record, Your Honor," Nathan replied calmly, handing the document to the bailiff. Judge Thomas slammed his gavel down. "Overruled. The witness will answer the question." Luke stammered, completely unable to form a coherent sentence. The judge dismissed him from the stand with a look of absolute disgust. The brick wall my family had built was beginning to crack. Next, Nathan called Landon to the stand. The young records clerk from Duke Children's Hospital nervously explained the massive security breach. He detailed how Christopher, my father's accountant, had illegally accessed Ava's medical files in a desperate hunt for psychological ammunition. The judge's eyes narrowed sharply at my father. But the final nail in their carefully constructed coffin came from the back of the courtroom. The heavy doors opened, and two elderly people walked in. Elijah and Sarah, my ex-wife Elena's parents. They had flown in all the way from California. Elijah took the stand. He looked directly at my parents with absolute contempt. "My daughter Elena set up that inheritance specifically because she knew exactly what kind of people Charles and Lorraine Alden really are," Elijah testified, his voice echoing loudly in the silent room. "She knew they were entirely obsessed with money and status. She knew they favored Carter. She wrote the terms of that trust to form an iron wall around Julian and Ava. To suggest that Julian is unfit is an absolute insult to my daughter's memory. Julian sacrificed every single thing he had for that little girl." I felt a tear slip down my cheek. I hadn't cried in days, but hearing Elijah defend me, defending Elena's fierce love, broke something hard inside my chest. The opposing lawyer tried to do damage control, arguing that while the methods of gathering information might have been unorthodox, Carter was still the most financially stable choice for custody of the trust. He was still the successful regional director. He was still the responsible one. Nathan let him finish his desperate speech. Then Nathan turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the petitioner claims to be acting out of deep brotherly love and a desire to protect his family. I ask the court to submit one final piece of evidence. Defendant's Exhibit C. A security recording from my client's front porch, taken less than 24 hours ago." Nathan connected his laptop to the courtroom monitors. The screen flickered to life. The black and white night vision footage showed my driveway. Carter's silver Porsche pulled up. Carter stepped out, walked up to my front door, and looked directly into the hidden lens. Then, his voice filled the entire courtroom. Loud, cruel, and absolutely clear. "I need that trust fund for the wedding and the down payment on the new house. You're going to lose. You've always been the weak link in this family, Julian. Just a burden. Sign the papers tomorrow morning before we walk into that courtroom, or I swear to God, we will destroy whatever is left of your miserable life." The video stopped. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was so quiet I could hear the faint buzzing of the fluorescent lights overhead. I looked at Carter. He looked like he was going to throw up. He was gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles were white. Lorraine had her hand covering her mouth, her eyes wide with sheer panic. Charles was staring straight ahead, completely paralyzed. Judge Thomas leaned forward over his heavy mahogany desk. His face was a mask of pure, unfiltered fury. "In my 30 years on the bench, I have presided over many ugly family disputes," Judge Thomas said, his voice dropping an octave, ringing with authority. He picked up his wooden gavel. "This petition for guardianship is dismissed with extreme prejudice. Furthermore, I am forwarding the transcripts of this hearing, the bank records regarding Mr. Patterson, and this video evidence directly to the district attorney's office. I strongly suggest an immediate criminal investigation into perjury, bribery, and criminal extortion." He slammed the gavel down. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "Court is adjourned. This is the moment that changes everything, the moment I finally took back control of my life. Thank you so much for your patience and for staying with me until now. You've been amazing. Please give this video a like and comment one below to let me know you've made it this far. Not only does this help more people find this story, but it also lets me know that my experiences truly mean something to someone. Your support is my greatest motivation to keep sharing the rest of this journey." The fallout from the courtroom was immediate, brutal, and entirely public. Word travels incredibly fast in affluent social circles, and scandal is a currency everyone loves to spend. Within 48 hours, the pristine, perfect image my parents had spent decades carefully cultivating completely shattered into a million unfixable pieces. Carter's glamorous engagement, the one they had celebrated with expensive champagne while I stood in the mud at the cemetery, imploded spectacularly. His fiancée's family was highly connected in Raleigh, and they wanted absolutely nothing to do with a man facing potential extortion charges. She gave the massive diamond ring back and publicly canceled the wedding venue at the Grand Horizon Hotel. The non-refundable deposits they had bragged about became a massive financial loss. But it didn't stop there. The district attorney's office took Judge Thomas's recommendation very seriously. They launched a full investigation into the $40,000 wire transfer. Christopher, the shady family accountant who had illegally accessed Ava's medical records, was immediately audited. He was eventually stripped of his CPA license and fired from the firm. As for Luke, the man who sold a decade of brotherhood to save his house, his karma was swift. The DA offered him a plea deal to testify against my father regarding the bribery. He took it to avoid jail time, but the damage to his reputation was permanent. His employer fired him the moment the news broke. He was totally shunned by our entire mutual friend group. People crossed the street to avoid him now. I thought watching them lose everything would bring me a profound sense of joy. I thought I would feel an overwhelming, triumphant high. But as I sat in my quiet apartment, reading the updates Nathan sent me, I didn't feel happy. I just felt a profound, heavy sadness. The justice was necessary, the protection of the trust fund was vital, but it didn't bring my little girl back. It didn't change the fact that the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had looked at my child's death as a massive payday. Retribution is a highly effective shield, but it is a terrible blanket. It doesn't keep you warm at night. 3 weeks after the gavel dropped, a massive thunderstorm rolled through Raleigh. The rain was coming down in thick, gray sheets, hammering against my living room windows. I was sitting on the couch, drinking tea with Arthur, quietly going through some of Ava's old hospital bills that Nathan was helping me clear out. Suddenly, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. The motion alert from the front porch camera. I picked up the phone and opened the live feed. Standing on my front porch, completely soaked by the blowing rain, were Charles and Lorraine. They didn't have an umbrella. Charles looked 10 years older. The arrogant posture was completely gone. His shoulders were slumped. Lorraine was openly crying, her expensive mascara running down her cheeks in dark streaks. They knocked on the heavy wooden door. Not an aggressive knock, but a desperate, pleading tap. "Julian." Lorraine's voice crackled through the small speaker on my phone. "Julian, please. I know you're in there. Please open the door. We need to talk to you." Arthur looked at me, setting his mug down slowly. He didn't say a word. He knew this was my choice to make. I didn't get up from the couch. I simply pressed the microphone button on the screen. "Go away," I said. My voice echoed loudly from the speaker mounted above their heads on the porch. Charles looked up at the camera, his face twisted in desperation. "Son, please. The DA is moving forward with the charges. Carter is going to lose his job. He might face actual jail time. The firm is under massive audit. Please, Julian. We are begging you. Call Nathan. Tell the DA to drop it. He's your brother. We are your family." "My family," I replied, my voice completely flat, completely devoid of any remaining affection. "My family is buried at Maplewood Cemetery." Lorraine sobbed heavily, leaning against the doorframe. "Julian, we made a mistake. Terrible, stupid mistake. But you can't destroy your own brother's life over this." "I didn't destroy his life," I said clearly. "He destroyed it the minute he stood on this exact porch and threatened a grieving father. He destroyed it the minute he forged legal documents while his niece was in a coma. You all did." "Julian, please," Charles begged, his voice cracking. "You drank champagne and celebrated a wedding on the exact day I put my 9-year-old daughter into the ground," I said, the cold truth cutting through the sound of the rain. "You buried your son on the exact same day I buried my daughter. Do not ever come to this house again." I took my thumb off the microphone button. I watched the screen as they stood there for another 5 minutes in the pouring rain, realizing that the door was never, ever going to open. Finally, they turned around and walked slowly back to their car. I closed the app, turned my phone entirely off, and went back to drinking my tea. The boundary was set in stone. A full year passed. The seasons changed. The brutal Carolina summer gave way to a crisp autumn, and slowly, the agonizing, sharp edges of my grief began to soften. I didn't forget Ava. I thought about her every single minute of every single day. But the memory of her stopped feeling like a knife in the chest and started feeling like a warm light guiding my steps. With the legal battle permanently won, the massive inheritance Elena had left behind was entirely secure in my name. I could have bought a massive house. I could have bought a sports car. I could have retired at 33 and traveled the world. But every time I looked at that bank balance, I didn't see money. I saw Ava's bravery. I saw Elena's fierce protection. I saw a tremendous responsibility. I walked into Nathan's office on a bright Tuesday morning. He smiled when he saw me. "Julian, you look good. You look like you're actually sleeping." "I am," I said, sitting down in the leather chair. "Nathan, I need your help. I want to build something. I want to take the trust fund and restructure the entire thing." Over the next 6 months, Nathan worked tirelessly, doing the entire massive legal project entirely pro bono. We established the Ava Alden Charity Foundation. Its mission was simple but incredibly vital: to provide direct, immediate financial assistance to low-income families whose children were battling rare pediatric blood disorders. We paid for the experimental treatment. The crowning achievement came in November. I stood in the newly renovated pediatric hematology wing of Duke Children's Hospital. The hospital administrators, the leading doctors, and dozens of nurses gathered around. I pulled a velvet cloth off a gleaming brass plaque mounted on the bright, freshly painted wall. It read, "The Ava Alden Pediatric Oncology Center, dedicated to courage, hope, and the families who fight in the dark." I ran my fingers over the engraved letters. I pictured Ava in her purple beanie, dragging her heavy 4-pole down this exact hallway with stubborn, absolute pride. She was here. She was everywhere now. As the foundation grew, something inside me fundamentally shifted. I had spent so much of my life shrinking myself to avoid conflict with my overbearing parents. I had spent so much time being the quiet, compliant son, the one who didn't rock the boat. But surviving the fire they put me through burned away all that fear. The hospital asked me to speak at their annual pediatric medical conference. There were over 400 people in the massive auditorium. Doctors, wealthy donors, hospital executives, and families currently in the trenches of illness. When I walked up to the wooden podium and adjusted the microphone, I looked out at the sea of faces. A year ago, I couldn't speak without my hands violently shaking. Today, my hands were perfectly steady. I gripped the sides of the podium and took a deep breath. I didn't give a sterile corporate speech about charity tax brackets or funding goals. I told them a raw story. I told them about the agonizing nights sleeping in uncomfortable plastic hospital chairs. I told them about the soul-crushing terror of watching your child's fever spike at 3 a.m. And I told them about the money. Money is a very strange thing, I said into the microphone, my voice echoing clearly across the silent room. People will lie for it. People will completely betray their own blood for it. Money can tear a family apart with terrifying speed. But if you put it in the right hands, if you attach love to it instead of greed, money can become armor. It can become medicine. It can become the absolute difference between a family losing their home and a family getting to bring their child back to it. I looked out at the audience. Several people were wiping tears from their eyes. My daughter's inheritance was almost stolen to buy sports cars and fund a lavish wedding. But we fought back. And because we fought, that money is right here in this room working to save the children you love. Do not ever let anyone tell you that fighting for what is right is being dramatic. It is survival. When I finished speaking, the entire auditorium stood up. The applause was deafening. It washed over me like a massive wave. But I wasn't proud of myself. I was just acting as a messenger. I was just the steward of Ava's legacy. After the conference ended, I was walking through the main lobby of the hospital, heading toward the parking garage. The lobby was busy, filled with the usual chaotic hum of doctors and patients. "Excuse me? Julian Alden." I stopped and turned around. A man my age, wearing a faded flannel shirt and work boots, was walking quickly toward me. He looked exhausted, the kind of deep, bone-weary exhaustion I knew intimately. Holding his hand was a little boy, maybe 5 years old, wearing a bright red superhero t-shirt. The boy had no hair, but his eyes were bright and incredibly energetic. "Yes, I'm Julian," I said, offering a warm smile. The man stopped in front of me and suddenly grabbed my hand, shaking it with intense, desperate gratitude. His eyes were swimming with tears. "I'm Joseph. This is my son, Wyatt." I knelt down slightly to be at eye level with the boy. "Hey, Wyatt, I like your shirt. Spider-Man is the best." Wyatt grinned, showing a missing front tooth. "He shoots webs." Joseph pulled me back up, his grip still tight on my hand. "Julian, I just wanted to find you and thank you face to face. 9 months ago, Wyatt was diagnosed with the same exact disorder your daughter had. My insurance absolutely refused to cover the specialized marrow treatments. They denied the appeals 3 times. We were going to have to sell our house. We were completely out of options." Joseph swallowed hard, a tear escaping and tracking down his rough cheek. "Then the hospital social worker connected us with your foundation. You guys paid for the entire treatment. Every single bill. No questions asked. Wyatt finished his final round of treatment last week. The doctors did the scans yesterday. He is in total remission." The world around me seemed to blur and completely stop spinning. The noise of the busy hospital lobby faded away into absolute silence. I looked down at the little boy in the red shirt, bouncing on his heels, full of vibrant, undeniable life. "He's alive," Joseph choked out, wiping his face. "My boy is alive because of your daughter." I couldn't speak. A massive lump formed in my throat, cutting off all oxygen. I just pulled Joseph into a tight, fierce hug. We stood there in the middle of the lobby, 2 grown men holding onto each other, connected by a bond stronger than blood. When they finally walked away, heading out into the bright sunshine, I felt a warmth spread entirely through my chest. The agonizing pain that had lived there for a year finally dissolved. Ava's legacy wasn't trapped in cold granite at the cemetery. It wasn't trapped in legal court documents. It was living and breathing in children like Wyatt. It was out there, changing the world. The gravel path winding through Maplewood Cemetery felt vastly different than it had a year ago. The exact same massive oak trees shaded the walkway. The exact same gray headstones leaned in uneven rows across the green grass. I stopped walking and knelt directly beside her polished granite stone. I reached out and gently brushed away a light layer of yellow spring pollen. The sun caught the beautiful stone, making the deeply carved letters look sharp, clear, and permanent. I carefully placed the white lilies down, arranging them neatly, and then set the stuffed rabbit gently at the heavy base of the stone. I sat back on the damp grass and just looked at her name. "Your name is absolutely everywhere now, sweetie," I whispered into the quiet breeze. "It's on shiny plaques in the hallways at Duke. It's written on massive research grants. It's spoken in the living rooms of families who finally know they are not fighting in the dark alone. You did that. You saved them." I sat there for a long time, letting the peaceful silence wash over me. I thought deeply about that very complicated word, family. For 32 years, I thought family was simply defined by blood, by a shared last name, by a legal inheritance. I thought it meant you were automatically obligated to tolerate horrific abuse just because you shared the same DNA. But I realize now that family is none of those things. Family is not a biological obligation. Family is an active, daily choice. It is profound loyalty. It is the old man next door who brings you soup when you are starving. It is the lawyer who fights for your dignity pro bono. It is the shared connection between two fathers crying in a hospital lobby. Family is the kind of love that aggressively stays and fights for you when the rest of the world completely disappears. When brutal betrayal painfully forges your backbone into steel, you eventually have to decide which doors you are going to lock forever, and which new doors you are going to bravely open. I finally locked the door on my past, and looking at the bright blue sky above Ava's resting place, I knew the door to my future was wide open. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. I know it was heavy, and I know it was dark at times, but I hope this resonated with you in some way. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation? Have you ever had to cut ties to save yourself? If you've watched this far, you belong to the 1% Club. Please comment the letter W below. That stands for winner. It's my way of recognizing the amazing people who stay until the very end and truly listen. If my story moved you, please hit that like button and follow the channel. We have a lot more real, honest stories to share, and I'd love for you to be a part of this community. Stay strong, and I'll see you in the next one.